Good afternoon. It is very nice to see you all. I'm very pleased that the room is full again. I would like to welcome you to yet another great talk in our lecture series, The United States in World Affairs, the Cold War and Beyond. I'm Klaus Lares, and I'm the Richard M. Krasno Distinguished Professor of History and International Affairs here at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm very happy to observe that once again it is very sunny and nice in Chapel Hill. I would like to thank the many generous sponsors for supporting this lecture series. As always, if you would like to become a sponsor yourself, just let me know. I won't turn you away. All our talks and lectures are available for free on our YouTube channel. Please subscribe to our channel and watch as many of the talks as you possibly can. All the talks are really great fun. It was the Clinton administration in the 1990s that normalized America's relations with the communist government in Vietnam. Washington entered into diplomatic relations with Vietnam in 1995. And only very recently, the US obtained naval access to Cam Ranh Bay, an important Vietnamese naval base. Not least, the perceived threat from China has brought the United States and Vietnam together again these days. Who would have thought so? Only just over 40 years ago, the Johnson and then the Nixon administrations were busily bombing North Vietnam back into the Stone Age. At the same time, Washington was desperately trying to stabilize the government in South Vietnam. Until recently, until the war in Afghanistan, the Vietnam War was America's longest war. Today, I would like to welcome a distinguished scholar to UNC-Chapel Hill who has just written an exciting new book about the Vietnam War and what the CIA was up to in Vietnam. It is a great pleasure to welcome Professor Randall Woods to UNC today. Thank you. Randall Woods is a Cooper Distinguished Professor of American History at the University of Arkansas. He has written extensively on US political and diplomatic relations with the outside world. Among his most notable books are A Changing of the Guard, Anglo-American Relations 1941 to 1946. And also another book, Fulbright, a biography of Senator J. William Fulbright, and a book on LBJ, President Johnson as the Architect of American Ambition. His latest book is Shadow Warrior, William Colby and the CIA, and Colby was CIA director from 1973 to 1975. However, Randall Woods is not only a prolific writer, he is also an excellent teacher and lecturer, as we will find out today. I noticed a few student comments on the web. One student wrote, "If diplomatic history or foreign affairs appeal to you in the slightest, take any courses from this master historian. Incomprehensibly vast knowledge and equally crazy grasp of the material," the student wrote. And another student explained, "Woods really knows his stuff. Very interesting. I would highly recommend you take his class, but you need to be aware that he is a very tough grader indeed." Randall is also former president of the Society for Historians of American Foreign Relations. This past fall, he was the John Winant Visiting Professor of Government at Balliol College of Oxford University in England. Previously, he held the Visiting Mary Ball Washington Distinguished Professorship at University College Dublin, and he also was a Fulbright 50th Anniversary Chair at the University of Bonn in Germany. Today, Randall Woods will talk about the CIA and Vietnam, William Colby, and the other war. And I would like to encourage you to ask lots of challenging questions afterwards. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the great pleasure and honor to present to you Professor Randall Woods.
Thank you, Klaus, and thanks to this marvelous institution. I'm not going to tell you it's one of the finest institutions of higher learning in the country, and I'm honored to be here. I have many friends here. One of them is Professor Kathleen Duval, who is an accomplished historian, but I knew her when she was in pigtails. You were talking about, I don't know whether you read this one comment on the web, which particularly stuck in my mind on me as a teacher. It said, the lectures are very interesting. I become completely absorbed and totally forget I'm listening to an old man standing up there talking.
I did notice that, but I didn't.
Did you say that?
I thought it's better not to say.
And I'll tell you one other teaching story. I can't resist. This was 4 or 5 years ago, and I'd finished lecturing, and a very tall, attractive co-ed, blonde co-ed stood up and said, "Oh, Dr. Woods, I've so been looking forward to taking your class. And I said, oh, how did you hear about me? She said, my mother had you. So there you go. Puts us in our place. I became interested in William Colby because I teach a course on U.S. and Vietnam and have so for the past 20 or 25 years. And if you're familiar with the literature on Vietnam, and if you lived through that period yourself, you're probably aware of the fact that for scholars, for people in the media, for many people in this country, not those soldiers and civilians who were in Vietnam, but for many here, the war was over in 1968. With the Tet Offensive, I mean, for all practical purposes, the war was over. The anti-war movement was cresting. If you look at the newspaper media coverage of Vietnam between 68 and 72, it almost doesn't disappear, but it loses all steam and momentum. People who write about the war argue that this was a disgraceful period when Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger had decided to leave Vietnam, but to do so, to take 4 years in doing so, costing many Vietnamese and American lives. But there's a different. The period from 68 to 72 was a period in which the American counterinsurgency and pacification effort in Vietnam peaked when it came to maturity, when it came to fruition. And I wanted to write about that. I wanted to read the records, to interview some people who'd been there, and I wanted to make a little money, so I needed to write a biography. And Bill Colby seemed an interesting and compelling person, and he certainly was at the center of what some people call the other war in Vietnam. Let me give you a little background, and then we'll talk about the other war in Vietnam. Now Colby is significant, is central because he was Saigon CIA station chief from 59 to 62. He headed the 4 East Division in the Central Intelligence Agency from 1962 to 1968. And then he headed CORDS, the Civil Operations and Revolutionary Development Support, the acronym for counterinsurgency pacification in Vietnam. I have to read this because I can't remember it. If you've been in the military of the CIA, you know that things are named so that you can't remember them. The names are not designed to describe, but to conceal. So after all these years, I still have to read it. CORDS is the acronym. So he was a good pivot to work around, to look at this effort. Colby, an interesting man in and of himself. He was the only child of Roman Catholic parents. His father was a career Army officer who had a PhD in English literature. His mother was a Roman Catholic, upper class from St. Paul, Minnesota. Colby grew up, was born in 1920, he grew up on Army bases. Significantly, his father did a 2.5-year stint in China between 1929 and 1931 as part of the 15th Regiment there, which was the American contingent, the American part of the foreign contingent that became very present in China after the Boxer Rebellion. But he later on his resume he listed Chinese as a language. I don't know whether he had any or not, but he listed he was fluent in French. But that made a profound impact on him in a sense, because he had this for an American and at that time this incredible foreign adventure, and he really had the run of the city. He was aware enough to know that China, and particularly this gateway to Beijing at that point, Tianjin, was a hotbed of intrigue, foreign maneuvering for power, and unlike many other CIA people, he was more interested in Asia and the Far East than most other CIA directors. If you've ever seen his picture at Langley, he's holding chopsticks, something he did very deliberately. His father they returned to this country. His father ran the ROTC program at the University of Vermont. Bill, very bright guy, was admitted to Princeton. He graduated from Princeton, but instead of belonging to the eating clubs there, he waited tables at the eating club. He was a working class Ivy League kid, devout Roman Catholic, head of the cadet corps, the ROTC cadet corps. When he was graduated, he was admitted to Columbia Law School, but World War II broke out, and of course, he enlisted. His father was a career military. He never hesitated. He was initially assigned to the artillery in Oklahoma, which he disliked, both Oklahoma and the artillery, intensely. When the OSS came calling, Office of Strategic Services came calling, he signed up. He spent the next 2 years partly at the Congressional Country Club, which became an OSS training ground outside of Washington, D.C., and then in Scotland, where he became a jetbird, which if you're familiar with the military history or intelligence history, this is sort of the predecessor to the SEALs. It's sort of Ivy League's version of the SEALs, if you will. And he trained in Scotland. He became part of the three-man French, British, American teams that dropped into France in 1944, and supplied, organized, led the partisans that attacked the Germans as Patton broke out of his enclave, distracted the Germans, harassed the Germans. And when he was finished with that, he became part of something called Norso, which was a Norwegian commando team made up of Norwegians and Norwegian Americans. Colby had been captain of the ski team at Burlington, Vermont, a ski team no small feat since they had no chairlifts. It showed the kind of guy he was. But that's one of the reasons he was assigned. There was a movie that was made based on Norso's exploits. His team blew up 2 bridges, the crucial bridges, along with 1 train, which kept 140,000 German troops bottled up in Norway and Scandinavia, and kept them from getting to Germany and joining in the final battle. Now, before he landed in Germany, when he was in Britain, Colby recalled that he checked out, he bought at a bookstore T.E. Lawrence's 7 Pillars of Wisdom, and I found his copy. His son said that, it was his sort of constant companion. And Colby later recalled that Lawrence's exploits in Arabia impressed him with the importance of the political component of insurgency, of organizing any kind of armed, popular-based rebellion. I argued that was his primary lesson, that he learned, that he became attracted to political warfare, psychological warfare. My son, who's an historian who's read this and has worked with me, said, no, that's not right. Said, no. What he learned from Lawrence was, Lawrence's book was a meditation on how much evil a good man will do in a perceived just cause. I think he's right, and I'm wrong, whether Colby knew that or not. Certainly, that would be the underlying current of Bill Colby's life. And if you want to be dramatic, you can analogize to the country as a whole. Colby thought that he was going before he left the service. He suggested to his superiors that he be allowed to put together a guerrilla force that would liberate Franco's Spain. He was told that probably was not a good idea, that was impractical. But there is this zealotry in Colby. He loved warfare. He and his family were liberal Democrats, New Deal Democrats. His father had once gotten in trouble because he defended a group of black soldiers at post he was assigned to. So very much a New Deal liberal. He thought he would be sent to China for the last stage of the Japanese War, but the atomic bomb, of course, kept that from happening. He finished law school at Columbia and went to work. He joined the practice of William Donovan, who Wild Bill Donovan, the founder of the OSS and Colby's mentor, hero. He found corporate law less than challenging. So when the CIA came calling in 1950, he was ready to go, and he remained with the. You never leave the CIA. I don't know if some of you have been in the CIA, perhaps, but if you're at that stage, you never leave the CIA. So he was associated with the agency for the rest of his life. Now, there were two cultures that emerged in the CIA at the outset of the Cold War. The first, and the conventional culture, focused on espionage and counter-espionage, spying, John le Carré, that sort of thing. The other culture it grew out of the OSS and grew out of what Colby did. It focused on nation building, counterinsurgency, psychological warfare, mobilizing populations to resist or to rebel or to overthrow. Now, that culture was very much in disrepute until General James Doolittle, of the Doolittle raid fame, wrote a top secret memo. I don't think it was made public until the late 1970s, in which he, at the outset of the Cold War, argued to the military and political establishment, diplomatic establishment, that if this country did not adopt, wasn't willing to drop its scruples and adopt the tactics that its enemy was employing, that we were going to lose the Cold War. We were an open society. We were dealing with a culture, unlike the Nazis and the Japanese, that wanted not just people's labor and their subservience. They wanted to control their minds. They wanted to control them completely. They wanted to control society completely. As an open society, we were vulnerable, very vulnerable to that kind of threat. Unless we were able to employ the same tactics that the Soviets and subsequently the Chinese communists were using, torture, whatever, that we were going to lose the war. Well, from that point on, you see the emergence of this other culture, counterinsurgency, pacification, nation building. You see it's very prominent in the Eisenhower administration with the overthrow of the Mossadegh regime, activities in Guatemala, culminating with the failed Bay of Pigs operation. Indeed, for Dwight Eisenhower, who wanted to reduce the military budget, counterinsurgency pacification was a kind of not only a strategic but a financial answer to the strategic problem that we faced. Colby was first assigned to Scandinavia, where he trained stay-behinds. The idea was that we weren't going to be able to defend Scandinavia if the Soviet Union overran it. What we were going to leave behind were these paramilitary groups with arms, with radio equipment, and with training that could burrow away at the Soviet Empire from within. He'd take his family off to the countryside for a picnic and meet up with somebody and give them a radio and 50 hand grenades. Sort of. Kids thought that was great fun. In 1953, he went to Italy and spent several years there, where he focused on political warfare in an area in which politics was important. As you probably know, the Soviets and the Italian communists decided not to make that another Greece, to fight it out on political grounds. Colby was instrumental in cooperation with the Catholic Church and other anti-communist elements in propping up centrist and left-wing groups, and in fact managed to triumph there. In 1959, much to his delight, he was assigned to Saigon as CIA deputy station chief. Within a year, he was station chief. Now, by this point, the No Dinh Diem and No Dinh Du, his brother, had been in power since 1954. As far as the public was concerned, the war was going well. A tough little miracle man, that sort of thing. But in truth, when Colby arrived there, he found in the countryside that things were not going well. That he was very intimate with both brothers, and for some strange reason, very intimate, particularly with No Dinh Nu, a paranoid sort of Svengali, if you will. But Colby was fascinated by it. They talk about politics and revolution in the countryside for ages. Some of Colby's detractors argued that they were Catholics. They were neutral Catholics who had contempt for Buddhists. Thought they were weak and structuralist and incapable of dealing with the communist threat. While Colby, now the Ed Lansdale, the famous or infamous architect of the Philippine victory in the Huc War, the defeat of the Huc rebels, was in Vietnam by the mid-1950s. And the CIA, there were two CIA stations. There was one regular station and then Lansdale's operation, which was trying to organize the peasantry, was trying to build support in the countryside, fight communism at the hamlet and village level, without a lot of success. I wouldn't say that Colby was a Lansdale. I think he thought Lansdale was probably pretty naive, but Colby got on board with this, and even though he was regular station chief, he started the first counter-insurgency and pacification program in Vietnam while he was there. The Vietnam it contains 43 different ethnic groups, most of them in the Central Highlands and in the northern Highlands. They're traditionally oppressed by the ethnic Vietnamese. The one particular tribe that Colby came in contact with, the Rade, he decided to, and that they were very much in danger of that they were being harassed by the VC and also being seduced by the VC at the same time. He developed something called the Civilian Irregular Defense Group. What he and his handful of aides did was to persuade the government in Saigon to arm these villagers, to allow them to construct their own defenses, to conduct their own defense. Colby and his father were great students of the French and Indian War, the Revolutionary War, New England townships, all of that sort of thing. Very much influenced his thinking. He thought that people in arms, people who were willing and able to fight for themselves, developed a political consciousness that was going to empower them and eventually empower the country as a whole. It's a sort of microcosm. The CIDGs were successful, one of a number of CIA groups. The problem that Colby faced, and this would be continual, was that the generals in Saigon, well, at this point, the Diem and Nu, viewed any armed group that they didn't control, whether they were communists or not, as a threat. It would be like trying to, in the 19th century, arm the Sioux to build a nation, if you see what I mean. A little bit of cultural blindness. Colby was called in '62. The South Vietnamese army drafted all the Rade who were in the CIDG so they could control them. Diem and Nu were assassinated in '63. You have the beginning of a military government in Saigon that would never end. There would not be another civilian government in Saigon. In Washington, Bob McNamara and the Defense Department took control of counterinsurgency and pacification with disastrous results. The military then, I don't know about now, but for a long time, viewed irregular warfare with veiled contempt. If violence was involved, it should be done by regular soldiers. And the whole counterinsurgency and pacification until the advent of Creighton Abrams would be very much a stepchild. And so this initial attempt to organize, pacify the countryside, to build support, began to wither on the vine in the early 60s. Colby came back to Vietnam was part of his charge, but his real focus from 62 to 68 was Laos. And he was the architect of the secret war in Laos. Up to that time, the largest unconventional war the U.S. had ever fought. Air America, the CIA, under Colby's direction, armed eventually some 60,000 Hmong tribesmen who harassed the Ho Chi Minh Trail, who harassed the NVA along the border there for the next 8 years. Colby thought that the effort in Laos was what we ought to be doing in Vietnam. There was a minimal American footprint. You empower the people to act in their own behalf. You supply medical supplies, food, agriculture, technology, weapons, but you empower these people. And he thought that that's what we ought to be doing in Vietnam. There were people, acolytes of Colby, who were still in Vietnam after Diem fell, after Key came to power and when Van Tu came to power. People like John Paul Vann, Frank Scotton, Everett Bumgardner, people who worked for the U.S. Information Service, for the USAID. These people were all, I couldn't, so you worked for the USAID. Frank Scotton, sort of a legendary guerrilla, lived in the bush, ambushed VC, trained paramilitary teams. He worked for the Information Service. And USAID, for example. At one time, John Paul Vann worked for the USAID. It's a very complicated situation. There are a lot of people with a lot of guns and very blurred authority. But there were people on the ground living in the villages who began to lobby in Washington, lobby the Johnson administration to move away from Westmoreland search and destroy, arguing that it was counterproductive, it was creating millions of refugees, it was alienating the very population that we were trying to mobilize. And Colby in Washington was one of those who joined that lobby. There were people in the military, not a lot, but there were some. And gradually they began to make some headway. President Johnson in 1967 authorized the creation of CORDS, the counter-revolutionary, the counter-insurgency pacification movement that would flourish in the late 1960s. The CIA set up two training centers, one in Washington and one in Vung Tau, about 60 miles from Saigon on the coast. The one in Vietnam trained rural development cadre and provincial reconnaissance units. Provincial reconnaissance units were counter-terror teams, teams that fought the Ban An In, which was the Viet Cong terror teams. And the rural development cadre were Vietnamese who were trained to go into the villages, work with the peasants, build schools, try to attract, build community support for the community and for the government as a whole. There was a Vietnam Training Center in D.C. where military people, CIA, USAID people went for a year of intensive language training. Probably in 1963 there were no more than 25 Americans in Vietnam who could speak Vietnamese. By 1970 there were 1,700 Americans with language training, military and non-military, practically one in every hamlet in Vietnam. Talking to these people, you can't imagine the according to them, the difference that knowing the language made. I mean, it was just there was nothing like it. The Tet Offensive came in 1968, perceived to be a terrible defeat for the U.S., but in fact, it virtually destroyed the military branch, the military wing of the National Liberation Front. Not its political front, but its military front. It was a disaster for them. And it created a kind of window of opportunity, which Westmoreland wanted to fill with more troops, more divisions, more pile-on. But the other warriors persuaded him to fill with something different, with corps. Creighton Abrams replaced Westmoreland as commander-in-chief. Colby had known Abrams since World War II. Abrams, along with the new ambassador Ellsworth Bunker, were believed in placing in giving priority to pacification, counterinsurgency over conventional warfare. And in 1968, Bob Comer had some problems, political problems. Colby was detailed from the CIA and named to head courts, and did so until 1972. Between 1968 and 1972, these Americans, these 1,700 Americans, plus regular military people, special small military units, spread out across South Vietnam. They lived cheek by jowl with the Viet Cong, sometimes virtually in the same villages. They built schools, they built hospitals, miracle rice. They could speak the language. They lived in the village. They didn't go back to the town at night. They wore the black pajamas. And they began to make some progress, significant progress. So that by 1972, substantial portions of South Vietnam, you could see Kubota tractors, you could see power lines up, you could see bridges that weren't blown up, you could see farmers taking material to market. Don't get me wrong, there were still powerful VC strongholds in the Delta, and Cao Mo Peninsula, along the central lowlands. That's what the communism, Vietnamese communism, really got its start in South Vietnam, in the Cao Mo Peninsula. So there were still pockets, but there was this new apparatus, and cards was unique in American history because it was a combined military-civilian operation in which military took orders from civilians and civilians took orders from military. Colby was extremely proud of it. It had a number. You had infrastructure building in the communities, but you had armed self-defense teams. And they used something called they employed something called census grievance that they adopted from a Vietnamese counterinsurgency expert named Tran Ngoc Chau. Census grievance, they would go out into the village and ask peasants to. They give them questionnaires. List what do you complain? What are your complaints? And it doesn't matter whether it's communist or non-communist. You're being victimized by the local landlord. Are you being oppressed by the province chief? This will be kept secret. You can't imagine the kind of and there was no retribution, for the most part, insofar as courts could prevent it. And that whole concept of census grievance had a remarkable impact. So, by '69, the matters are moving along. Now you still have there's still remnants of Westmoreland in Vietnam. There's still free fire zones. There's still atrocities. But you have this. Courts is a moving operation. It had the components that I described. It had something called Chu Hoi, which was a program to persuade VC to desert. Life in South Vietnam was very personal, and we tend to think of it as ideological. But you might join the VC because your cousin belonged, or you might turn against the VC because they killed your uncle, and there was a lot of that. So Chu Hoi was designed to persuade people to desert. The most conspicuous, the most notorious aspect of courts was the Phoenix Program, which became the target of the anti-war movement in the early 1970s. The Phoenix Program was, it involved SEALs, U.S. Special Forces, who trained South Vietnamese counter-terror teams, who, according to North Vietnamese sources, managed to kill probably 20,000 VC cadre between 68 and 72. Cadre were the people the communists who went in, they were the backbone of the insurgency. They organized, they terrorized, and Colby believed that if they could be eliminated, that you could break the back of the insurgency in the South. But it became the darling of the anti-war movement in this country. Colby had to return, testify before my man Fulbright's Senate Foreign Relations Committee to try to defend this program of assassination. And I don't know what overcame him, but he bought into that, and he said, this is not a program. Well, of course it is. What do you mean assassination? We're at war. it had become, and there were posters that appeared in Washington of it's a card, the Ace of Spades with Colby's picture in it, the most wanted, I think the thing that historians, a lot of people remember about CORDS, about counterinsurgency and pacification more than anything else, is the Phoenix program, which, by the way, is the direct precursor of the current drone program. The direct precursor. We train these. You use U.S. South Vietnamese intelligence in the villages. You'd identify a VC cadre. You're supposed to get him to persuade him to surrender. If he didn't, kill him. The South Vietnamese government, it's controlled by the military. It's corrupt. A lot of bad actors in the South Vietnamese branch of this. They created a group of so-called provincial interrogation centers. You can imagine what they were like, which the South Vietnamese operated, but the CIA guarded. Nobody was allowed access to those, doing very bad things for good reasons. Who knows? The key for, and I'll wind this up. I know I've talked too long. The key, if this was going to work, was that Colby and his supporters, those disciples of counterinsurgency and pacification, if this was going to work, they were going to have to connect the Rice Roots Revolution in the countryside to the South Vietnamese government, the government in Saigon, the government of Nguyen Cao Ky and Nguyen Van Thieu. They were not able to do that. Entrenched military, corrupt, promotion based on favoritism. They were not going to relinquish power. The story came to a head in 1970. I mentioned a man named Tran Ngoc Chau earlier. He was a friend, intimate tutor to a lot of Americans, Van and Baumgartner and these people who'd known him all his life. A remarkable guy. He was South Vietnamese. He was in Buddhist seminary until he was 16. He left seminary to fight with the Viet Minh against the French. In 1950, he decided that communism was devalued the individual too much. His brother Hien embraced communism, became a high-ranking official in the North Vietnamese intelligence service. Chau volunteered, served Diem, and knew he was mayor of Da Nang. He was province chief in Ho Nha, which was at one time the most contested province in all of South Vietnam. He wrote a 2-volume manual on pacification. He's the guy that came up with census grievance. He became increasingly disenchanted with the military government in Saigon. He ran for parliament from Ho Nha. He got Catholic, Buddhist votes both. Beginning 1967, he began to try to organize a political movement that would challenge and oust the military regime in Saigon. In 1970, Thieu had him arrested, arguing that he was a communist agent. He was tried, convicted, and sentenced to 20 years in prison. At this point, for Bill Colby, and for the U.S. really, the fat was in the fire. If we were really going to effect bring into power a government that was going to be representative, that was going to, if not democratic, at least engender support, appear to be responsive, this was it. And Colby struck out. He and Abrams and Bunker would have nothing to do with Chau. They denounced him, left him to his own devices. Daniel Ellsberg, one of the reasons, Ellsberg, very interesting guy. At one point in the mid-1960s, he was in Vietnam carrying a gun, running around John Paul Van, playing soldier. It's big. He had a change of heart, whatever. But he still had close contact with these counterinsurgency pacification. He told me that the primary reason that he released the Pentagon Papers was because of the way the U.S. treated Randall Woods, who's still alive, by the way, barely, still alive.
You still live in that?
No, he's in Santa Barbara.
Much better place.
Yeah, much better place. No, he wouldn't be alive if. Although he and his brother, I mean, the Vietnamese are different culture. He told me, he said, you know, family is important there. Every full moon, he and I would go to my father's house, and we would have tea, and we would talk and visit, and then we'd try to convert each other, and we go our separate ways. Very, very different. But, and by this time, of course, it all may have been irrelevant anyway, and that's the tragedy of it, because the country had turned against the war. Kissinger and Nixon had decided at that point to leave Vietnam after, as Henry Kissinger told the Chinese leadership, after a decent interval. The title of the book by Frank Snipp. And the country had turned against the war. So there's no moral to this story. There is no moral to history. There's no lesson. I certainly do not argue that we could have won the war, or that we should have been at war, or that we should have been in Vietnam. That's really not the point. But this is a historical phenomenon that I think is most interesting, most compelling as a story. David Petraeus worked for Colby in Vietnam, and you see him trying to do some of the things that were being done there in Afghanistan. We don't have to go into that, but if you don't see many Americans wearing, well, whatever. We won't go there. But it is, and there is the techniques that the military, roughly speaking, use now to identify the enemy targets and to eliminate them are roughly the same. We're just using a different kind of weapon. And as an historian, you'll forgive me, but it seems to me that looking at the U.S. and counterinsurgency pacification, particularly the Chow case, during the Cold War, it was institutionally and strategically impossible for the U.S. to sponsor a movement for social and economic development, social and economic revolution that would lead to the overthrow of a friendly government. We couldn't do it. Ideology always took a backseat to strategy. Now, supporting a coup was a different matter because you're just changing one elite for another. But do you not see that in terms of the regime in Saigon and in terms of American Cold War foreign policy, what the Cordes people were doing in South Vietnam was eminently subversive? If you have any questions, I'll be glad to.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Let me ask you, do you see any parallels between the CIA in Vietnam and the CIA activities in Afghanistan and Iraq these days? And wouldn't be a lesson learned to be basically how not to do it?
Which is providing the lesson, Vietnam or Afghanistan? Well, I'm an historian. I know what goes on in Afghanistan and Iraq only from what I read in the papers. I can't see the comment. I mean, there's some obvious parallels with Afghanistan in terms of the character of the central government, which is very depressing. Trying to bring about a grassroots revolution there in a country which is governed by a corrupt elite. Maybe it's a hopeless task. I don't know. These people, a number of people who worked for Colby, there was one guy that we found, a guy named Doug Ramsey, who took John Van's place in Halnia province as province advisor, and he was captured by the VC in 1966. And most Americans who were captured were sent off to North Vietnam to the Hanoi Hilton. But he was one of 35 Americans that was held in jungle camps along the Cambodian border. And he was a prisoner for 7 years and 2 months. He was Harvard ABD, fluent in Vietnamese. We contacted him. He said some health problems. I wrote him, said, he got a, maybe he wrote some notes or something. I didn't hear from him. Christmas Day the next year, I got a 2,000-page single-spaced memoir from him. Every bug, every interview, every bombing, and I said, well, they didn't let you have pencil and paper. He said, well, I had these bad diseases, and I was quarantined in the Philippines, and I have total recall. So I sat down for 40 hours and dictated this, and then I did some follow-up interview. Anyway, very intelligent guy, very bright guy, very patriotic. But Ramsey and a number of these other people had decided by the time their tour was over that probably, maybe not the Lao Dong, the North Vietnamese, but the National Liberation Front was probably the best vehicle for achieving social and economic justice in South Vietnam. This one.
I'm a cordsman.
Hold on, we'll need to give you a
Cords-
microphone.
Where?
I was doing I was state. You mentioned the
I should have mentioned State Department.
a lot of state
Right.
officers were sent there, and so I went through the whole thing. The year of Vietnamese training, VTC at that time had no military in it anymore in 1969. And there is a parallel to this, because back 8 years ago I was lecturing at Fort Bragg to civil affairs people going out, and one of my talks was getting along with civilians. And the people in this, a couple of guys came down and said, this is amazing. What happened? Why didn't we have this? And partly it's because Vietnam disappeared from the military vocabulary. And so we've sent a lot of civilians to Afghanistan and Iraq who don't speak the language, who never had the opportunity to take 10 months doing it. I won't go on in great detail. This is fascinating. I was a district deputy advisor, me and 6 military guys. Mm-hmm. And then I went down to a district on the South China Sea where it was me, lieutenant, and a medic, and I was a senior advisor. All of this worked pretty well, except when you talk about working for a military guy as a civilian or vice versa, it doesn't do you any good for promotion, because you don't write the same kind of promotion thing. This Binh Tre, or Quinhua, was the birthplace of Madam Binh, who was the foreign minister of the VC. After the ceasefire in '73, Kissinger sent back 100 language officers back to Vietnam as vice consuls, and what we were there for was to monitor the reconstruction, the international supervision group. When I left Quinhua, there were still remnants of VC. When I first got to Quinhua, I could go to about half the province. You mentioned the 68 Tet, but you didn't mention 72 Tet, no, because whatever was left of the cadre in 68 disappeared in 72. When I went back in 73 to the same province, there were NVA people down there. Something absolutely unheard of in the Delta. I mean, they don't even speak the same Vietnamese. One of my great frustrations was that the Saigon government, of course, was run by a bunch of people from the highlands. And so when the thing began to disintegrate, the Delta, I think, could have survived, but nobody had any interest in the Delta surviving because it didn't count for anything except rice farming.
You belong to Bruce Kinsey's operation, or you remember that, he has the course.
Yeah, I have. I've gotten things from them, and there's a book that's being worked on that I've never have worked on. Yeah.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, please.
I didn't hear you. You spoke of a conversation you had with Ellsberg.
Yes.
And I missed what you said he told you.
He told me that, and you've got to take everything that he says with a grain of salt, I think. Maybe that's true of anybody, but he's, he told me, and some of his friends, Frank Snapp, who was CIA, said that the thing that really triggered, he was so angry over the refusal of the U.S. mission in Saigon to support Tran Ngoc Chau, to allow Chu to send him to prison. That's what caused him to release the Pentagon Papers, publish the Pentagon Papers.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I was on a mobile advisory team in somewhat involved with. I had a civilian district advisor. I'd like you to expand a little more on how Cords was subversive. I didn't quite get your logic there.
Well, you and I wouldn't think they were subversive. The powers that were thought they were subversive. We were. You see what I'm saying? Like No Din Dim and No Din Nu, Win Van Tu and Key viewed any armed, sort of self-sufficient community in Vietnam that they didn't control as a threat to their power. Do you see what I'm saying? Not subversive, un-American.
Okay. Yeah.
But in a sense, because we continued to back that government, we were. Yeah. It was.
Thank you. Thank you. Any more questions? Yeah. Do you have a question?
Well, no, I have a comment about the subversiveness of it. You mentioned the Hamlet evaluation system, which was much denigrated because it was what people said we controlled 95% of the country and really didn't. But where it was subversive is I had to go around every month and get these things filled out in every hamlet and every village and ask a lot of questions. Who didn't care for this was the Vietnamese district chief, because every time I rated a village as not controlled by the government or where the government couldn't even enter, this got the village chief or the district chief, who was a Vietnamese major, in deep trouble.
Yeah.
And so every time one of these things was coming out, I knew that I was going to get a ration of grief from this guy because I was hurting him. And in that way, the effort was subversive because it pointed out to those who read the fine print that everything wasn't going as swimmingly.
Well, and it's much more complex than I have led you to believe. I mean, it varied from province to province and village to village. It depended on who the Vietnamese province chief was. If some were corrupt, some were not corrupt. So you had to deal with that. You had to deal with that situation. I'm sure that's the case now in Iraq and in Afghanistan. But this is and some people argue that the CIA shouldn't have done this, that it was beyond its purview. That Colby thought he wrote a paper after he retired in which he argued for the creation of the institutionalization of courts with a military component, permanent.
Thank you.
So I don't know how much of the inner workings of the CIA you got into with your research, but you sort of implied that the director sets tone and policy. But I have some friends that were in the CIA who told me that there are many little subunits and enclaves within the CIA with their own budget who basically have very little oversight and kind of do what they want to do.
That's the other part of my book.
Okay, so you agree with that sort of?
Well, the great feud between Colby and James Jesus Hank. Created his own entity. He ran the Israeli desk without any input from anybody else. He got a separate budget. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Hold on.
That's okay. What do you think happened to Colby? Is that in your book?
I think he was murdered.
You do. That's okay.
I just don't know who did it. There's so many candidates, it's unbelievable.
Can you tell us about the circumstances of his death?
Well, he was. I guess Colby was at that point 76, 75. He'd remarried. He'd left his wife of 35 years and remarried. He was head over heels in love with this woman, his second wife. They had he loved to sail. He had a sail, but they were on the Chesapeake. They had a little fishing cottage on the Chesapeake. And his wife was visiting her mother in Houston, and he called her and said, "I've been over working on the boat all day, getting ready for it was springtime, getting ready for the summer setting." He said, "Get the barnacles off." I said, "I'm tired. I'm going to get some oysters, corn on the cob, and have a glass of wine and go to bed." Came home. He was out in the front yard. The neighbors saw him. The last person to see him alive. A week later, his body washes up on an inlet or an extension out in Chesapeake Bay. First they discovered a canoe there that they used, full of sand, and then several days later discovered his body. When the CIA person dies like that, the first people on the scene are the CIA. Okay, and the last people on the scene of the CIA. The coroner, the police, everybody else gets what's left over. Okay, that's just the way it is. And as I said, once CIA, always CIA. So he was involved in some operation. So the coroner ruled that he died of unknown reasons, and then they ruled that he drowned. Although, as I recall, his lungs weren't full of water. And he had now. His family is distraught about this, and people have argued that he's murdered. His middle son argues that he committed suicide out of remorse from leaving his first wife, the middle son's mother. The second wife believes that he had a heart attack and fell over in the water. What the hell is he doing out at 8 o'clock at night? 76-year-old man paddling around in a canoe. In the house, doors open, lights on. Keys are on the table. Half a glass of wine.
And why wasn't his devoted wife calling him every night about those 7 days?
Well, she'd spoken to him that day.
Well, but
I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know. Well,
So-
no.
Before his body washed
They
up?
reported him missing next. They began to search for him the
Oh.
next day.
So who would have had an interest in murdering him?
Randall Chow.
Still?
I like the guy. He doesn't seem like a murderer to me. But look what happened to him. Look it up. When Colby was he was third ranking in the CIA. No. He was director when the Saigon fell, and all the CIA personnel who came back, he addressed in the auditorium at Langley. And I got this from a guy who was Frank Snell. He said, you ought to be proud of yourselves. We made a good effort. We, did everything. And they were unbelievably angry at him. Unbelievably angry at him. Because they'd gotten 90,000 South Vietnamese out. But 3-4 times that number had collaborated with the Americans. Some of these guys had, terrible thing to say, but they used to say about people who've been a long time in Vietnam, they're leaving their loved ones to return to their family. People had lovers, they had children there, and they were extremely bitter about that. There was an encounter, I haven't been able to get to the bottom. He had this encounter with Claire Booth Luce about Kennedy's assassination, about Castro, about Cuban involving Cuban exiles. And someone was trying to get information to the government that would link either Castro or the exiles to Kennedy's death. He was involved in his name. There were two guys in Australia who were involved. One was ex-Special Forces, another was an Australian. But they were running international money laundering thing that funneled funds to the Contras, that funneled to various groups that the U.S. supported. Well, they found he was connected with them. So, but believe me, the CIA, you'll never find this out. Now, or I may be wrong.
Thank you. There's a question over there. Can you speak up?
I have a loud voice. He died or was killed in 1996, about 22 years after the war ended. In his later life, did he ever express remorse for the whole thing? Not so much the CIA portion of it, but the entire war?
Never, not once, ever, never.
So in his opinion, the Vietnam War was a good thing to have done, even in his last days on the earth?
Have you read T.E. Lawrence? You do, it's not you win, you lose. It's not black and white. It's not good or bad. His favorite movie was The Third Man. It's about, you make a choice. You make a choice. You decide on what is, if it's moral or if it's spirit, whatever. You decide what needs to be done. And then, if you have any integrity, you live with the consequences. You live with the consequences. He may have had, I think he had some regret about when he was in Scandinavia, they were training these poor Poles and Lithuanians. They were giving them paramilitary training and dropping them back into Poland and Estonia, and they never heard from him again. But he was a hard man. Now, this guy was a hard man in Indonesia. Remember when Sukarno? Sukarno was overthrown. When Sukarno, I can't remember, but there was a huge communist insurgency there, and we got our man back into power. Well, he and the station chief supplied in long lists of suspected communists and communist sympathizers. Well, in the anti-communist reaction against that, more than 300,000 people were murdered. The rivers were so clogged around the capital city that you could walk across them. This is a hard man. But no, he didn't. And I asked his wife. He's a thoughtful guy. One of his best friends was Bernard Knox, the classicist. He was a great fan of Greek tragedy.
Thank you. What was his relationship with Nixon and Kissinger?
He never thought he'd be CIA director. And Nixon and Kissinger named him because, for that very reason, he had no political base. They thought he was a good soldier, he'd do what they wanted. They were wrong. The man was trained in constitutional law, had strong convictions. He initially he was a good soldier. He initially wanted to do what they wanted to do and be loyal to them. But after the family jewels began coming out, they wanted him to stonewall, to lie, and he wouldn't do it. So he and Kissinger became blood enemies, and Kissinger got him. So
Kissinger didn't murder him.
He didn't need to. I mean, they were speaking. It's bureaucratic murder. See what I'm saying? But Kissinger was trying to keep the family jewels from coming out because he knew it would implicate him in the overthrow of the coup against Salvador Allende. And Colby kept telling me, "You don't tell him everything. We don't have to tell him everything." She said, "But the secrets are out, and the newspapers are full of it. And if we continue, and given the mood of the public in Congress, which was very anti-war, very anti-CIA, if we don't show some responsiveness, despite the constitutional arguments, there's a very good likelihood that the Congress will do away with the agency." But as I said in the book, no figure has divided the agency more than Bill Colby. You still find people who are just believe that he just destroyed the agency. Well, Hamilton implied that he was a Soviet mole. That going public with these secrets, that cooperating with Congress was exactly what the Soviets wanted to have.
Tell us precisely what he did with the secrets and going public.
Let's see. Start. It all really. It's hard to keep things from investigative reporters, like the Bay of Pigs operation. So they began to dig and they found out that the CIA was trying to use the mafia to kill Castro. And using sort of James Bond type weapons. Well, that sort of whetted their appetite. The rumors began to circulate that we'd assassinated Trujillo and the Dominican Republic, that we'd assassinated Congolese leaders, and assassination was all the rage then because of the Phoenix program. Assassination this, assassination that. That's what the CIA was assassination incorporated. But the Seymour Hersh, who was New York Times investigator reporter, one of the most unscrupulous people ever to have lived in this country, although an amazing investigative reporter. Colby told his secretary, he said, "That son of a bitch knows more about what the CIA has done than I do." And so he began to uncover these things, and they were being published in the paper. And the White House was saying they weren't saying anything, but they wanted Colby to say, this is all untrue. This is all untrue. It's not true. Didn't happen. Never happened. And to go down to the ship. They were perfectly willing to see him go down to the ship. But this is when the church committee and the House committee, Colby, there were 6 different. By 1975, there were 6 different congressional committees investigating the CIA. And so what Colby tried to do was to say, look, we don't give you names and sources. We could, whatever. We're not gonna. These things happened, but Kissinger and Ford by that time viewed that as a betrayal. But also by getting rid of Colby, this is typical Washington. You could hopefully you could sort of indirectly blame the whole mess on him. That's not logical, but. Do you see what I'm saying? You just sort of sweep it away. But for him, this was a crucial issue. And also, as I said, he was trained as he had 2 of the best constitutional lawyers who were then teaching in the U.S. at Princeton. And the idea that he should ignore a subpoena from Congress was abhorrent to him. Look, Kissinger and Ford didn't give a shit about whether you ignored a subpoena or not. What's that got to do with anything? But it's they're still in the supposedly the revelations alienated our allies. They wouldn't share secrets with us. It according to the Reagan administration, it nearly lost us the Cold War. And according to James Angleton, who Colby fired, who was head of Counter-insurgency, that Colby was actually a mole. But Angleton felt guilty because he was responsible for the K-5. He was taken in by the
Bennett?
by the British.
Burgess.
Kim Philby. Yeah, he was responsible. He was a Philby Duke team, so he probably felt guilty. But anyway, that's a whole different thing. And his son, he didn't. Colby was he said, everybody who occupies a high level in any agency dreams about running that agency. What would I do? But he never thought he would be. And according to his sons, it really changed him. I mean, up to that point, he was a CIA operative. He did intelligence. He did counterinsurgency, pacification. Suddenly, he is a world figure, acting on a very large political and strategic stage. And so, when he entered off, that's why he was initially sort of taken advantage of, because he wasn't used to thinking in those terms. He was still thinking as a loyal operative, but he had this sort of epiphany in '74.
Thank you.
You mentioned that Colby was a proponent of a minimal American impact or presence. Is that philosophy still in existence anywhere in the CIA? Is that a relevant philosophy for helping Obama in the Middle East today?
I'm not aware of enough of the current situation, the problems that he faces. And one thing I have learned after studying, I learned this when I was in administration, college administration. I learned this from studying historical phenomena. So it's that how many people generalize about things they don't know anything about, and my ignorance is in the current situation is really profound. Because he studies it, I don't study it, so I can't. But I know that's true in the CIA. There's still those people who argue, it's the light footprint. You don't have to. That's what the CIA is about. Initially, Colby. You ask if somebody asked if Colby had any regrets. No, because there was no nuclear war. There was no Armageddon. He told his son, he went to a conference in Moscow in 1990. And after the meeting was over, he walked around Red Square, and it was snowing. And he suddenly realized that nobody was following him. Nobody was following. And he said, that was my victory lap.
Thank you. Maybe he was disappointed of having become not as important as before. Can you briefly tell us about the reform of the CIA, which happened because of Vietnam, because of the assassination attempts, other, dubious activities? What were the reforms? How were they implemented? And are they being whittled away? How would you see that?
No, I can't say about whether they're being whittled away. I can tell you about the reforms. Again, I don't know anything past 1976. I don't know.
I think that's a cop-out.
I don't even know who was president. What happened in the CIA, and the problem with Angleton and these folks, was that you had stovepipe effect, in which everything was based on a need to know, compartmentalization, and so. Angleton was running the Middle East desk, but Angleton was running he was sole contact with Israeli intelligence, and he didn't share any information with the Middle East desk. Okay, he ran counter-espionage against the Soviet Union, and his primary target. And he looked for moles. His primary target. Angleton's target was not the Soviet Union, it was the Russian and East European division of the CIA. You see what I'm saying? Colby comes in and said, we're consuming, these people are crazy, we're consuming ourselves. We've got to share information. We've got to, take everything, all in the international world, everything's connected. We've got to break these fiefdoms down, knock these walls down. Well, he reorganized it structurally so that when they met, when they exchanged information, there was overlap. The emphasis, instead of hiding information, it was sharing information. In the culture that Angleton and also Dulles and Helms and some of those other people, they were so afraid of a mole that they allowed this stovepipe culture to develop. And many people argue that it really damaged the CIA. Now, Helms and Angleton's defenders argue that secrecy is what espionage is all about, and the idea is to place moles in the other services. And you're naive if you think otherwise. And they cite all of the scandals that have happened, Ames and all of those people since then. Who's right? Who's wrong? Probably neither. Both. But running a spy agency in a democracy is a special problem.
People who do diplomatic history are supposed to all want to become Secretary of State. When I listened to you, I was wondering, did you ever wish to become CIA director?
No, because as I said, I got drafted in '69. I said half my company went to Vietnam and half didn't, and I'm glad. I was lucky I didn't, because I'd have gotten killed within the first week. I'm just inept. Totally. I'm an academic. I couldn't. And the bureaucratic warfare, the bureaucratic, and also I'm a believer. Colby's a believer. I couldn't do what he did. I couldn't do what he did. But somebody's got to do it. Better a believer than not a believer. Or not.
So, because having written a book on Colby, have you become an admirer of him?
I think he would have been. I wrote about Bill Fulbright, and I knew Fulbright. I interviewed him, and I liked it. He could be arrogant, but I enjoyed him. I wrote about Lyndon Johnson, and I admire him. I admire his domestic agenda. I couldn't take him. I couldn't stand to be around him for 5 minutes. Colby, I think I would have enjoyed, but there was a certain reserve about Colby. He knew many people, but he had few friends. He had lovers, but he didn't have friends. He didn't have people that he shared with. He was Bill Colby. he wasn't. You see what I'm saying?
Before we let you go, your overall assessment of his term as CIA director.
Well, I think that he acted in the agency's best interest. I think it would have been a disaster for the country for it to have turned against the intelligence community. And what happened was that Church, he managed the situation so that Church and other congressional critics criticized individuals, but upheld the agency and its role in American foreign policy. And so I think that I think he would have avoided this whole thing if he could have. God, he would have avoided it. But it just, like Vietnam, it with Johnson, it came up on his watch. So.
Thank you very much indeed.